traveling, one thing I like to do is go to small businesses, whether I'm shopping, eating. I like to go to places that aren't big chains, and in Michigan, we have a ton of those places too. So I'm not a traveler in Michigan, but if people are, those are the places they should be seeing. So to talk a little bit more about some of these small businesses, we are now joined by Brian Calley, who's the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan. So good morning, Brian. Thank you for being with us. How are you doing on this Thursday morning?
Well, it is a beautiful day, Erica. Thanks for having me back on the show. It's great to talk with you. And yeah, as we look at what's happening with small business around the country, some industries are recovering really nicely and have adjusted to the environment that we have to exist in these days. But there are other industries that are really, really still struggling, and they tend to be those industries where there's face-to-face interaction with people, the ones where the rules are much more unpredictable. And so a lot of business owners are, I think, getting pretty nervous that they haven't been able to have an open field for economic recovery over the course of the last 17 months until this summer, and then heading into the fall. What is that going to hold? It's a lot of places around the country are starting to reimpose rules and requirements, and it's going to be tough on the smallest of businesses who really weathered the worst of the economic storm as compared to the entire economy.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely scary, and I've been thinking that a lot to myself. As we see these restrictions being reimposed in all other places, I kind of wonder when and if is that going to happen here. But before we continue, I want to ask you, and I'm sure this question has been asked a ton of times, but what constitutes something as a quote-unquote small business?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. The United States Small Business Administration considers 500 employees and fewer to be small, but that's pretty big, getting up to hundreds of employees. So in terms of our association, you can join our association all the way up to 500 employees, but the vast majority of businesses that consider themselves small have fewer than 100 employees. And in fact, if you were to look at our membership across the board, the majority of them have fewer than 50 employees. So it's everything from a solopreneur that's stringing together gigs to make a living to those who have a team of dozens of people. But generally, it's those that their footprint for how and where they operate tends to be much more local, and the size of the business tends to be described in employment force of dozens rather than hundreds.
Yes, definitely. That does make sense, because to me, 500 kind of seems like a lot. But as we talk about businesses that have less and less employees, that makes me think about staffing issues. And I know probably about a year ago is when we were really talking about unemployment, and everyone just wanted to sit home on their couch and collect unemployment. Now, we're not seeing that as much anymore. Maybe we're just not hearing about it as much anymore. But I can tell you, I know restaurants that I walk into, you'll see every other table's open, and it's not anymore because they have to social distance. It's because they can't seat people because they don't have the staff. So what is that looking like from an inside perspective, and not just someone who's going in and noticing it? How much are these small businesses still struggling to get people to come into work?
It is the number one concern that we hear now that the restrictions, the closure orders in Michigan have been lifted. Staffing concerns have risen to number one by far. We hear this more than any other issue. And unemployment, the way the unemployment system worked was one of the components to that. But if you look at the businesses that were last to come online, the ones that were restricted for the longest period of time, their workforce really had to find something else to do for a living. And so when restaurants, for example, were closed to indoor dining for so long, all of a sudden, finally the government lets them open back up and do so in a full and robust way. Well, all their staff had to find other things to do, and so they're kind of starting from scratch. I've heard a lot of business owners that has described it like being back in startup mode, where they're trying to find that base of employees to even sustain an operation. So you see businesses that are limiting their hours, limiting the days that they are open simply because they can't find enough staff.
So I don't want to put this as choosing the lesser of two evils. I hate that I even just said that, but do you think it's these businesses have to decide what's worse, either staying open for more hours and just not being able to, let me rephrase. When they are open, is it better to seat all your tables but know that you have limited staff and you're not going to be able to serve as many people? The service isn't going to be as good, but at least people will be seated. Or do you block off half your tables and make people wait for longer, knowing that you don't have the adequate staff? Is that something that a lot of restaurants specifically are juggling, and they have to decide which one's better?
Yeah, and restaurants are being very innovative right now, and they're having to figure out when is the most economical time to be open. So, some places specialize more with the lunch crowd or breakfast, and so they might be only open in the beginning of the day because they don't get as much business in the end. Others are set up for weekends, and so they really have to just pick what's most important because they literally cannot staff up. It does look like that most businesses, though, are choosing to make sure that if they can't open with a minimum level of service, whatever they consider to be the minimal level of service that they have to deliver to their customers. If they can't do that, they don't open, and because bad service is just something that's difficult for anybody in the service industry to recover from. So rather than disappoint people who show up, limited hours seems to be utilized a little more often than that. But you also see them pulling out all the stops and in terms of recruitment and paying higher dollar amounts. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it would have been unheard of to see places offering in restaurant positions in $20 and $25 an hour, even in fast food. So they're really doing everything that they can do to possibly find people. And it has helped some that the expectation that you'd be available and looking for work has been re-added in Michigan. So some people on unemployment that were just kind of waiting out the weeks have had to get back into the job market. But ultimately, there's been some fundamental shifts. And some businesses, by the way, are starting to implement technology. I went to one restaurant, for example. They couldn't get enough wait staff. They kind of rolled the dice on a system where you order. There's a QR code. It brings up a website, and you make the order, and then somebody brings your food out to you, but you don't actually see a person until your food's coming out. And that's an example of a technology being deployed right now because of the shortage in the workforce. And who knows? I mean, maybe that will really catch on. And businesses are figuring out how to run their businesses with fewer people because they don't have any other choice right now.
I actually think that's really cool, and that makes me think of, those conveyor belt sushi places where you sit around and you just tap on a screen and then the food comes around to you on a conveyor belt. I know, like I said, I see it with sushi. I don't know if other types of places are doing that, but they totally could. You just, the food shoots out to you. But, we talk about all these negative things and innovation, but I'm going to try and make this a little bit positive. Have you seen any of your businesses have success out of this? Have any of them been able to find a silver lining? Are any of them better than they were before? Sorry.
There are definitely businesses that have found new opportunity through the way that the world has changed. There's where people are working, for example. Our IT companies that do networking and office setup and there's endless opportunity because people are getting set up in multiple places, and so there are some that have found that type of opportunity. A lot that got into lines of business tied to the pandemic recovery as well, but that was more a place filler, while whatever else they did before was not as in demand. So yeah, things are changing. Actually, I think that the remote work movement and kind of this abrupt change to remote work, while it's created a lot of turmoil in the marketplace and where and how people consume, it's also given employers who are having a hard time finding employees a wider range of geography to search for employees from. So whereas you might have needed somebody who was within commute distance before, maybe you don't need that anymore in terms of how the job has been restructured. We also see a lot of businesses that are figuring out that they're, the footprint that they're, the space that they're leasing, that they don't quite need as much. But again, there's always two sides to that. So on the one side, somebody can figure out, hey, I can operate more efficiently. I can get employees from across the landscape. I can reduce the amount of size that I'm leasing. But then you got to think of the whole ecosystem of businesses that are there to serve office workers in particular. The lunch crowd or dry cleaners. So many different businesses that simply exist to serve office workers. If those office workers are now at a different zip code every day, you can think of how that, it creates opportunity over here. It creates a lot of turmoil and strife over there. So with this pandemic, and there are silver linings. There are definitely businesses that have found opportunity, but unfortunately, that it's opportunity and on the other side of the spectrum, total financial ruin. So it's tough. But here's the other thing too that I've been really pleased to see is that more people than we've seen in a very long time are turning to entrepreneurialism. So the number of new business starts, and we know this by looking at the tax identification number filings, the new starts of businesses throughout this pandemic has actually been way up, higher than we've seen definitely in the last 10 years. So there are a lot of people that are looking at it like, hey, for a lot of different reasons, I'm sure, but I'm gonna go for it. I got this idea, always been thinking about starting a business, and I'm just gonna go for it. We see it not just higher, but multiples higher than what we see in normal times.
Yeah, Brian, I was just going to mention, I was driving around West Bloomfield area over the weekend, and I could not believe how many new restaurants I saw either just opened or were getting ready to open. And I thought, these people are either the bravest people in the world or the craziest people in the world, or a combination of the two. So what advice do you have for companies, especially in the restaurant industry, who might be opening now, how they can just get through this and survive so a year from now, there's still a good, thriving business?
Well, it's a great question. You alluded to, is this brave or crazy to open a business right now? But in a lot of times when there's a bunch of upheaval, people that really just go for it and put everything into it are rewarded for that. And I think that really the community wants to rally around small businesses as well. If we just have an environment where we can give them a chance to. So the advice and it's not just for restaurants, it's for all business starts, is that you have to be prepared to put everything into it, like your time and your motion and your effort and your determination. You have to have perseverance, just to make it through those initial stages, and to be very responsive to the opportunities. I mean, it's still the case where, entrepreneurs will often say, it seems like the harder I work, the better luck I have, and that's because hard work pays off. And so it won't be easy. It's never easy, but that's really what drives our economy ultimately. Whether you're talking about the corporate giants that exist in our state that rely on a supply chain of very nimble, innovative small businesses that can make the whole supply chain work, or standalone individual businesses that it's about somebody with an idea and had the guts to take that idea through to create opportunity for their community. So I'm really excited about the startups that we see happening in a lot of different industries. It'll take a while before we see how successful they are, and whether or not their survival rates are higher, lower, or the same as what we normally see. But I think there's an opportunity here, and it's one that I try to make sure that our policymakers understand too. The more stability and predictability that we can provide in terms of public policy, the better the chance that this new surge of entrepreneurialism will have roots to stand. Because nothing will throw a wet blanket on economic activity like uncertainty. The pandemic brings uncertainty. To the extent that we can provide more predictability and certainty to what is going to happen in the operating environment, I think the better these businesses will do.
So, talking about these new strategies, this is something that's not really a new strategy, but the internet. Just how much has the online presence for businesses been able to help? And are we seeing some businesses that are only online now?
Yeah, there's definitely, that's a trend that's been happening. It was obviously accelerated very substantially in the throughout the pandemic. Here's the thing though, is that some businesses like Amazon were just really well positioned to scoop up a whole bunch of new business during the pandemic. And so it's not as easy as a retailer. Let's say you got a retailer on Woodward downtown, and their main traffic are office workers that are coming downtown every day to work. Now all those office workers moved, or many of them moved, and maybe permanently. So what do? Most of them already had some online presence, but the idea that you can just get a website, go online, do remote procurement, and you're good to go is not very realistic. I mean, to have that online presence, for somebody to go online to look for something and find a particular small business, it's not particularly likely unless you already had a strong online presence, or you had some other network that could kind of give you a boost as you got started. And so there are some great examples of businesses that have a strong online presence. They tend to be the businesses that are tied into some sort of a social responsibility or a social cause that has that kind of viral tendency online. But this to move from a brick and mortar type of base operation to an online, it's not the sort of thing you can just do overnight. And it's tough because you search for something online, and to kind of get through the noise of the giant online retailers to where somebody would even have a shot of considering a smaller business, it's an uphill battle for sure.
Definitely. And with more, sorry, these keep falling out. I'm not used to wearing headphones, but with more of the online presence, a lot of that is not necessarily online stores, but just being able to do stuff on Zoom. And businesses are giving up office space, which then I guess can help because it makes them have to pay less rent for their employees. So do we think this is a trend we're going to see moving forward of businesses realizing, hey, we don't need to be paying rent in places if we have all our employees work online? Do you think that's going to be something that we continue to see, or do you think they are eager to have that face-to-face interaction and it's worth it for them to be paying rent places?
I think we're going to see a transition here in the future where a lot of work stays remote that has been remote this whole time. So employees clearly have a preference for remote work, and employers are going to have to respond or be responsive to that. So you'll see hybrid systems, you'll see kind of hoteling type situations where people can be present at the office. Some positions do require more on-site work, but what I expect to happen is that there will over time be kind of a center of gravity, and people will start to migrate more back to the office when the pandemic is further in the rearview window. And that's just because that's where the spontaneous interactions happen. That's where deals get done. That's where people collaborate. They get to know each other and trust each other and form relationships that go beyond just the work at hand at that moment. So I think that that you're going to see more in the future than in the past, but I think probably a lot will stay remote, and then gradually people are going to figure out that, hey, it's better for my career learning this line of business, kind of advancing through, forming relationships with the team that I work with if I do more work in person. So I think you'll see kind of a curve where it comes back some, but I don't think it'll ever be the same. I think downtown areas in particular are going to have to be reimagined. A lot of this office space that exists today is going to have to turn into something else. There's some work on the what's essentially like the historic tax credit, the federal historic tax credit, where maybe they could use that for conversion of office space into residential in downtown areas. And that really, on its face, that might make a lot of sense. You think about these areas, it probably would be better for them to have more people permanently living full-time downtown than to have office space where people are driving there every day. So there are ideas, there are ways that we can go. Every answer for every community is going to be a little bit different, but I think those communities that anticipate this, that put teams together to work on it and think through what's our best step forward here, and then also to be intentional about connecting people whose opportunity has gone away from the pandemic to those places where more opportunity was created. In the last Great Recession, I think that our state did not do very well and connect. The world changed, globalization changed, offshoring, a revolution in productivity. And so a lot of people, what they did for a living was no longer necessary for the process, or at least not here. And so there wasn't really a strong public policy answer for how do we connect people who lost opportunity to, the world has changed, where the opportunity went. And that could happen again if we're not very intentional about making those connections.
Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you so much for talking with us, giving us all this insight. We do have to move along, but it's always great talking to you. We really appreciate it. Is there any final things you want to share about small businesses moving forward, thoughts, feelings, anything we should know?
I just want to advocate that people ask, what can we do to support small business? There's something that every single individual person can do, and that is get your vaccine. That protects us from a future of closures and lockdowns and regulations that are expensive. They're harder on small businesses than big businesses. And I understand it's a personal choice, and everybody's got to make their own personal choice. But I'd ask you to please, on behalf of the of small businesses that really can't afford another set of lockdowns and closures, so please consider doing what you can do to limit the spread of COVID-19.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great rest of your day.